So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the play. Did you enjoy the play?
Yeah.
Those who don't know, sweet are you? Thank you. Wonderful. Yes, come in. You're the actor. I'm going to wait for you. So, yes. For those of you who don't know, I'm the writer. In case you wonder why I'm standing here.
Yes.
I wrote the play and directed it, and just to ask you, actually, how many people here this evening are Danes? Is that everybody who's not Danish? Is there a few non-Danes? Oh, actually, yeah. It's quite, six or seven non-Danes. And out of interest, I'd just like to know, how many people here have read a play by Shakespeare, read a whole play by Shakespeare? That's quite a lot of you. How many people have seen a play by Shakespeare? How many people have seen more than 5 plays by Shakespeare? Okay, good. So I've got a really nice audience of people who know Shakespeare's works. How many people here, before they came this evening, have heard about what is called the authorship question? About half of you. Who has never heard that there's a possibility that William Shakespeare did not write the plays? 4 or 5 people. So the rest of you have heard about this before and know about this as a possibility. Okay. Now the contenders for the possible other writer or the ghost writer are, apart from Marlowe, which is obviously my choice, but they are mainly the Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, is very much somebody who people think possibly wrote the plays because he was an aristocrat and close to the Queen, therefore knew all about the military and the aristocracy and those kind of things which are mentioned very much in Shakespeare's plays, and particularly in the history plays. And there's been a film made about Edward de Vere. Has anybody seen the film called Anonymous? It was a film made by somebody who believes fervently in that idea. And he made a movie. He was rich enough to make a movie. I'm not rich enough to do that, but I have made a play about what I believe. So let me introduce the actors. David.
Here we are. Hello.
And hello.
You can come every night. Oh, you do?
What the others don't know is that this lovely lady here has been to see the play already how many times? 3 times! 3 times. And did you get something new out of it every time?
Yes, I love it because the text is very nicely written. But I have a point. How it is no explanation when your hero, your Shakespeare, hid it in the Rose Theatre, how they found him. If he would be hide it there.
How they found?
How they found him.
Shakespeare because he was hiding in the Rose Theatre.
Oh, Shakespeare wasn't hiding in the Rose Theatre. Shakespeare spent one night. No, you meant Marlowe. Okay, that's why I didn't understand. Oh, Marlowe was hiding in the Rose Theatre.
Yes, but how they found him if he was?
How did Fraser and the 3? They obviously got some. Yeah, you just too much. Don't come 3 times.
We did actually talk it through, and we decided that Fraser. This was a pretty obvious place that Marlowe would probably run to one of the theatres, and that Fraser would, being a close associate of Thomas Walsingham, that obviously Marlowe was very closely associated with. They would it was kind of like a no-brainer. It was like an obvious place to look. So we didn't spell it out, but like a theatre and the greatest playwright, it was sort of a kind of.
Well, it was also, it's an interesting question because, as I mentioned in the play, the theatres were all closed because of the plague, which meant that nobody was going to go to the theatre. It was closed and barred, therefore a good place possibly to hide. The plague really kept people a lot indoors. So It was a place that he could, obviously Marlowe could get into because he knew the theatre very well. Anyway, the point is, that's my fiction. I made that up. So, I mean, but it's a good point that, yeah, he did get in. He crawled in a window. Is there any other questions that spring to your mind about?
Did Shakespeare leave a will?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, what I'd like to explain about this play is that every single thing that's mentioned in this play is fact. That Shakespeare's written a will. All these things are facts. I think of my play as a play, 5 scenes. There's 2 bookends in the beginning and the end, which is the scene between Walsingham and Maunders. And in the middle are the 3 scenes, which are my idea of what could have happened. But at each end is the scene with Walsingham and Maunders, and everything they say in those 2 scenes is fact. And the only thing that I have changed, one small thing I've changed, is that Sir Francis Walsingham died in 1590 and he wasn't alive in 1616. But when I was writing the play, I decided to take what we call dramatic license and keep him alive, because I thought it was much more interesting that the original spy master who recruited Marlowe was the man who had this dialogue with the police detective, who's a kind of what we call by today's standard a sort of detective type of character. So that's why I kept Walsingham alive. But apart from that, everything, including the will, is all fact. Shakespeare wrote a very detailed will. He mentioned every single possession he owned. Most people find it quite amusing that he left his second best bed to his wife, and the fact he left all his clothes to his daughter. But he did not own any books. He did not own any manuscripts of any of his plays. And he was a very rich man when he died. The thing about Shakespeare is that we know so little about him. And this is extraordinary because he was the greatest writer in the English language. And we know very little about his life. Contemporaries of his, who are lesser known playwrights like Ben Jonson, like Christopher Marlowe, like Robert Greene, there's many, many, many other names. We know more about them and their day-to-day life, what they wrote, what they had, and their wills, everything, than we do about Shakespeare. Now that is strange. Why would that be? The other thing about Shakespeare is we have no signatures other than 6 signatures of his. 3 of those signatures were on his will. And those signatures are almost illegible, and they're all different from each other. And not one of those 6 signatures is written the way we spell William Shakespeare today. Not one. And when he produced, the plays were published, which were not during the beginning of his career, they were published later in his career. On the front piece of each published play was the name Shake-Speare. This hyphen dash was put in the middle of his name, which suggests that it was a pseudonym, which suggests it wasn't the man's name. And possibly the literary people of the time knew that this was happening. Many people possibly suspected that Marlowe had not really died or been killed in that so-called pub fight because he was a spy and they needed to get him out of the country. He knew too much. Under torture, he could have given a lot away. So they didn't want him to be tortured. The Archbishop was the man who wanted him to die, not the Queen. So the thought is that the Queen was possibly behind him getting out of the country. And she moved her court to Greenwich, so she was in the verge, which meant that Deptford was in the 12-mile radius, or thereabouts, so that she could send her own royal coroner to the inquest into the body. Normally it would be a local coroner who would check the body if there was a murder or a death. This time the Queen's own coroner came. Now the interesting thing that I can't mention in the play, but I can tell you about here, is that how do we know about this coroner's report? Because at the time it was suppressed, it was confidential, and nobody really knew what happened to Marlowe. Everybody actually thought that he was either killed in a pub fight or that he died of the plague. But at 29 years old, he was dead. That's all they knew, and there was no grave, which is very odd for somebody who was so famous. He was the greatest playwright of his age. Now, how do we know about the coroner's report today? Because in 1925, a professor called Professor Hodgson was working on the archives and found the coroner's report into Christopher Marlowe's death, the one that was suppressed and made confidential. He discovered it in a hidden archive in 1925, and that coroner's report gives the most detailed description of the murder of Christopher Marlowe, to the extent that it even mentions where the knife went into his eye and everything. The fact that they were there for 8 hours in Deptford, waiting for who knows what. The fact that it was about the paying of a bill, which makes no sense. It was so detailed that people go, why was it so detailed? Coroner's reports didn't need to be that detailed. And the answer is obviously, they needed to prove he was dead.
And why keep
100%.
it secret?
Pardon?
Why did they keep it secret?
Why did they suppress it?
Yes.
Because they didn't want anyone to know.
That's what I mean, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So why was the real information suppressed?
Yeah.
With your play, you now contribute to this discussion about who was it, Marlowe or Shakespeare. Do you plan to publish a book, the play?
Well, I would be very, I'd like to publish it. I was telling somebody the other day that when I was doing my Christmas shows, I had a famous writer came to see one of them called Faye Weldon, and she said to me, have you published any of these Christmas shows, these comedies you write? And I said no, and she said, that's because you're a woman, because a man would publish his plays, and women don't get around to doing that. So yeah, it would be nice to get around to publishing it. Would you like to ask any questions of the actors who
I'd
are
like
sitting
to
here
say something to the
poised?
actors.
Yes.
And that was that I heard every word, all three of them.
Backstage as well, or just? I'm swearing a lot. Back.
Where's my dagger? Where's my dagger? No, that's lovely.
Did you believe the words?
Yes, yes.
Hey!
No, but thank you very much. That's nice to hear.
You have a wonderful presence on the stage, because, as you know yourself, it is not so easy to make, to create attention or hold the attention just in dialogue. So you did it wonderfully. It was very nice, and you were. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
That was the reason I come again and again.
It's a nice space to work on.
I didn't try it. No.
There's a lost skill. Actually, you're called the audience in England, and audience comes from audere, which is the Latin to hear. And we've forgotten that actually. You should be viewdiences these days, you know, because people watch these days. They don't really hear. So actually, the art of listening. You as the audience must congratulate yourselves on being able to hear and understand. But it's true. So. It's
a lot of information in 5 scenes. And when I was writing it, I was very aware that it would be quite difficult to hold people's attention. I was worried that it would be difficult to hold people's attention, which is why we discussed all sorts of things in rehearsals about how to make the characters work, and not to be humorous, but to be interesting as characters. This is why we decided the Maunders should have a northern accent, and each character, because I have 3 actors playing between them, whatever it is, 10 roles, is it? 3, 7. And it means, yeah, because you play 3 each, and you play 1, yeah. And it was very important obviously for David and Linford
3 narrators.
to have 3 very separate kinds of characters that they could play in the space of 1 hour and 15 minutes. And they're wearing the same costume throughout. So you have to be, as an audience, differentiate very quickly between these characters. Was that a problem for anyone?
No, you don't notice that.
Not at all.
No, you look at the character as soon as the accent changes. You don't think about the costume.
No, that's great. That was
Yeah, well, we were supposed to have much more fancy costumes from Kirsten, but Kirsten decided that it was too much and we should keep it simple.
Was the inspiration from Laurence Olivier beautiful also the same white shirt from his Hamlet from 40s?
From Laurence Olivier, exactly, that was what he wore when he played Hamlet. He did,
It's a very classic look.
in the 40s. Well, the thing is, it was quite interesting because I wanted each character to have a different costume. And Kirsten, my costume designer and set designer, produced all these wonderful costumes, and they were fabulous. And you can imagine these three guys dressed up in those costumes looked amazing. He looked fabulous as Sir Walter Raleigh with a hat and a cloak and everything, and frills and a
horse.
A horse.
And
A ship for the last scene.
so we were, working with all these fabulous costumes on that tiny stage, and then Kirsten said to me, doesn't work with all these costumes. And she's the one who'd done all the work on them. She'd been sitting sewing them. I said, you've done hours of work. She said, I don't care. They shouldn't wear these costumes, just the basic costumes. And Kirsten made the right decision. Or I made the right decision based on Kirsten's suggestion, because it was the right decision to make. Yeah, it works that way. The simplicity works. And we're basing it on the actor's performances.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make, as I say, the two bookends to be the chatty ones, and everything in the middle I wanted to be more lively and get some humour in the scenes between Shakespeare and Marlowe. Now, the point is that I personally, a lot of people have different opinions about the whole authorship question. I think, my opinion is, which I tried to express in the play, is that Shakespeare did collaborate with Marlowe. Who knows, maybe he went on to write some of the plays himself, or it was a collaboration. But what I tried to do, because I'm writing drama and I'm writing a play that I want to entertain people with, I'm trying to suggest that Shakespeare was the muse of comedy for Marlowe. Because a lot of people who don't believe that Marlowe wrote Shakespeare's plays say he could never have written Shakespeare's plays, because when you look at Marlowe's plays, there's no humour in them. They're terribly serious. There's two answers to that. One is that as a writer you develop and you change and you mature. So over the rest of the 23 years or more that Marlowe went on writing, if we assume he stayed alive, we can assume that his style as a writer developed. On the other hand, my idea is that therefore he used Shakespeare as his comedy muse. Sorry, there was a question.
Yeah, I'd like to ask what your thoughts are on, there's been a lot of speculation about Shakespeare and Marlowe had a little bit more than friendship, and it felt like there was a slight little nod there when they first met tonight, which I thought was absolutely charming. Just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, they were.
Well, I'm very clear in my play that Marlowe was homosexual. He was probably bisexual. In those days, homosexuality wasn't considered anything particular to talk about. It wasn't particularly important. I mentioned in my play the Earl of Southampton, who was reputed to be Queen Elizabeth's bastard son, and that some people really believe that, because when there was an assassination plot against Elizabeth's life with the Earl of Essex, the Earl of Southampton was involved. The Earl of Essex had his head chopped off. Earl of Southampton was pardoned for no other reason that anybody can imagine other than possibly he was her son. Anyway, the Earl of Southampton, if you look at the portraits in the National Portrait Gallery and you read everything about Southampton, the man was a screaming queen. The man was a totally gay man who dressed up like a woman, grew his hair long, put it in curls, the whole thing. And the Earl of Southampton was a big patron of the arts. And there was a lot of homosexuality, there was a lot of bisexuality going on. But Marlowe is reputed to have been gay, homosexual.
Well, there's this famous quote, yes,
the one that you say, which is about the boys and tobacco.
Oh yes, all those who do not love tobacco and boys
are fools.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a quote.
And that's a quote. I mean, as I say, everything in the play is things like that are true quotes.
Yeah.
And he said, you're a fool if you don't love tobacco, and you're a fool if you don't love boys. So Marlowe was definitely homosexual. So whether he had an affair with Shakespeare is probably very unlikely, and I've never heard that before, because the rumours about Shakespeare has always been the opposite. Shakespeare, I say in my play, he died of venereal disease, and that was a supposition at the time. He was a real woman lover, Shakespeare. That's what all the Shakespeare scholars today say. He even went backwards and forwards to Stratford to see his family from London, and apparently had a lady who he stopped at a tavern, what do you call that, an innkeeper's lady on the way, who apparently had a son by William Shakespeare.
He changed
It's
the
another
voices.
rumour.
But also the sonnets, which is where the rumour of Shakespeare's bisexuality, at least, was pretty evident, because they really, a lot of them do appear to be almost openly gay, and that Shakespeare didn't particularly want that them published. But when you read it, if you take on board this theory that it was Marlowe who wrote them, they become so obviously Marlowe, because there are
But not just that.
a lot of them are about exile,
Yeah,
and a lot
exactly.
about missing home, and talking about this loved one.
Giving up your name, giving up your muse, giving up things you have to give
Extraordinary.
up.
When you read it like
all
that,
things that
you
are
go,
not related to
"Ding."
Shakespeare's life at all.
Yeah, that was irritating. And now I'm going to say this because I didn't say it last night. Not that it's a big deal, but when Vivienne
Oh,
first
it is.
approached me about this, it's not a big deal. I'm over it now.
That's why I bring it up.
Yeah. No, but in 1969, my uncle found out a link in our family tree that makes me related to Shakespeare. That Shakespeare's sister married a man called Hart, H-I-R-T, which is a very old name in England. And a Bateson married a Hart, so for the next 300 years. So I go, oh, he's my second cousin. Oh, good old Uncle Will. That's where I get all my talent from, you know. So when Vivienne comes along and says, actually, he was just the glove maker's son. He was nobody, just ripping it. What? No! La 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 la. And so I was actually very much against doing what we're doing.
And on that note, I have to declare
I'm
an
totally
interest
convinced.
and say that the man who published many of Shakespeare's plays and who published the sonnets against Shakespeare's wishes was a man called Thomas Thorpe, and my surname. Bennet Thorpe over here. Thank you.
And there's only connection, what Jamaican connection with Shakespeare.
We're waiting for a connection. He's working on it.
Sunny time of year.
I spent a lot of time outside.
Yeah.
What theory is there about Marlowe? Where did he end up? How did he die?
Well, okay, as we know, there's one thing I'd like to mention is that in Westminster Abbey, all the famous writers have their graves or their headstones or their names or their stained glass windows connected to them. Marlowe's, it has a stained glass window with his name in, and it has 1564 to 1593 question mark.
And that's been there for 400 years.
That's amazing. So, what the theory is, my theory is, and Marlovians, the people who believe Marlowe wrote the plays are called Marlovians, the ones who believe Shakespeare wrote the plays are called Stratfordians. Marlovians, like me, believe that he did escape out of the country. He got to Italy. He probably lived around the area of Verona and Padua, because the first few plays are Romeo and Juliet, Othello, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Merchant of Venice, are the first 4 plays written by Shakespeare. Why would he write his first 4 plays set in Italy? My belief is that Marlowe was sitting there writing. Let's assume for a minute that even if, let's just assume for a minute that he did fake his own death. Let's assume that he got away, that he didn't die in 1593. Let's assume he gets to Italy or France or somewhere, probably Italy. Do we really believe that for the rest of his life he's going to sit staring out of the window of a palazzo belonging to his friend Thomas Walsingham? No, this is the greatest playwright in England. He loves to write. He's going to write. What the hell's he going to do with those plays? He needed a front man. So because of course he couldn't put his names on the plays, he was dead. So the front man could have been somebody famous like Ben Jonson, but that wouldn't make any sense because Ben Jonson's style was known. The famous writers' styles were known. They needed a totally unknown person to be the ghostwriter, which made sense that this small part player, Shakespeare had played almost nothing, tiny roles, that they chose him. And I think Marlowe chose him because of his name, Shakespeare, to shake a spear against authority. So I think that Marlowe went on living in Italy. I think that after the main furore about his death had died down, I think he used to sneak back into England, stay with Thomas Walsingham, who was his lover, at Scadbury Manor, which was in Kent, and it's a manor house which is quite hidden in the forest and quite close to London, but not that close, about a day's ride. And I think he used to sneak back and spend time with his lover, and therefore I think he had time to have collaboration meetings with Shakespeare. And we have to remember something, in those days there was no newspapers, there were no photographs, there was no social media, there were no gossip columns. Nobody knew what Marlowe looked like. His appearance was unknown. So he possibly could even get around, as long as he didn't go to places where he might have been known by court officials and things.
I think one of the interesting things about this play, actually, theatre is many things, and it should be to entertain, but it should also be to provoke. And actually, with this play, there's this huge amount of circumstantial evidence that you can actually go away and look at and study. And it is very, very interesting, and people are leaving here talking about whether it's true or not. But whether it is true or not, to get people to talk about it and to get the plays to live, to have Shakespeare's work looked at again with fresh eyes is really, really valuable, actually. So no matter what we're doing, we're
Go onto YouTube and look for who wrote Shakespeare. There's some really interesting
You will never get
documentaries.
any sleep.
There's lots of debates and
It's fascinating.
lots of
Really
professors and people that really know what they're talking about.
People often ask me, what does it matter? The plays are there. What does it matter who wrote them? Because they're beautiful anyway. Why are you bothering to say whether it was Shakespeare, Marlowe, Oxford? And I think it matters. I think it matters that we know who wrote the
to write
plays.
it? How long time it?
To this play?
Yes, or prepare.
You won't
I'm a quick writer.
yeah, just
She'd researched it for many months, but the writing.
No, I mean 3 weeks it took me to write it.
But it
But
was researched for at least a year and a half.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, I
And
researched. I've been
before
there.
that year and a half, she believed in another theory because she believed it was the Earl of Essex.
No, the
Earl
Earl
of
of
Deer.
Oxford. No, that was years ago.
Yeah.
I wrote a play. No, I wrote a play years ago. Started to write a play years ago called Dupe or Genius. Are you duping people or are you a genius? I called it Dupe or Genius, and I was going to put Shakespeare on trial, and I was going to have the audience at the end coming up with what they chose, and Shakespeare was going to put in a stand in my play, and he was going to be tried, and there were going to be evidence on both sides, and then the audience would choose. I never finished the play.
It seems that
So-
the actors are so convincing because they know so much also about not about Shakespeare and about the history. It's wonderful.
But the thing is, I love reading up things like this, and I get obsessed, and so when I've got it all in my brain, then I sit down and I write very quickly. I did write it extremely well. I wrote it while we were doing Crazy Christmas Cabaret, and we were in Aarhus at Musikhuset doing the Crazy Christmas in the evenings, and it was freezing cold. It was -2 degrees, and it was snow. And I thought there's no reason to go out in Aarhus. I've been so many times before. So I sat in the hotel room all day writing. That's when I did the bulk of it, actually. Yeah. But, yes.
Yeah. Has anybody investigated whether Shakespeare's and Marlowe's language and so matches and how much? Because that would be something interesting to do statistically if you could see that.
They have.
Yeah.
They have done big research into this, and it's quite fascinating. They've taken Marlowe's works and Shakespeare's works, they've taken the works of Johnson and other writers, and they've compared. And there are more words that are similar in Marlowe's plays to Shakespeare's plays. And what I say at the end of this play is that whole quote about a man's verses of they're misunderstood is like being struck dead from a great reckoning in a little room, is a quote in a Shakespeare play, and that is a quote about Marlowe's death. But also in As You Like It, the play As You Like It, the character of Phoebe quotes from a Christopher Marlowe poem. And when you read the Shakespeare play, it's got quotation marks around it, and that is from a Marlowe poem. No other writer in Shakespeare's time ever quoted from another writer. But Shakespeare quoted a lot from Marlowe. What the scene in Romeo and Juliet about the sun coming up and the sun is like my Juliet, that is from a Marlowe play almost identical to a play he wrote at Cambridge University called Queen Dido of Carthage, and there's a line in that which is almost the same. There is the sun and it is my Dido. It's absolutely extraordinary how many similarities they are. So I'm very glad you asked me that question. And one of these professors who has the time has written a whole book about it. I've written some of my source material on the program, and one of those is a book called Marlowe's Ghost by Dal Pinkson, and that is an excellent book to read because he has a whole chapter precisely on that. What's incredible about Shakespeare is that he introduced thousands and thousands of new words into the English language that he made up himself, and expressions, things like your hair standing on end, all these kind of expressions to disappear into thin air. These are Shakespearean expressions that he invented.
Yet his parents couldn't read or write, and his children couldn't read or write.
Why would a man who did that not teach his
He had
children?
10,000 more words than anybody else in the English language.
Why would a man who could use the English language like that not want his own children to learn how to read and write?
Again, it's circumstantial, but you're sort of left going, I am suspicious.
Now that is a fact, and that is really annoying.
He either didn't do it or he's a complete tosser.
Now, when you have these discussions, which they do, if you want to go on YouTube and check it out, they have debates. On one side of the table they have the people, the Stratfordians, and on the other side of the table they have the Marlowians or the Oxfordonians. And the Stratfordians do nothing but stand up and say, it's all absolute crackpot. It's all rubbish.
You're all mad.
You're all complete. And then I get Walsingham to say, which is what one said on YouTube, he stood up and he said, if you don't think that a glove maker from Stratford can write these plays, then you're a snob. And that's what I get Walsingham to say. I took it straight out of a YouTube debate. Because, yes, I mean, the Stratfordians
kind of an argument, is that?
You're a snob because you don't think a glove maker. You know, because you could use that as an argument. Hans Christian Andersen is supposed to have written your wonderful Danish fairy tales, and he was the son of a shoemaker from
but Marlowe was a shoemaker's son, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. Now the thing about Marlowe was, to go back to your question about Marlowe, is that Marlowe was the son, he was the only son of a family of 8 children. His siblings were all girls. He was the only boy. So all the attention, the focus and the money towards education was put into him. However, it was still not a wealthy family. So when he got into Cambridge, because he was very, very clever, and he got a scholarship to Cambridge, and he was already in Cambridge by the age of 17 years old, and he could speak 4 languages, including Greek and Latin. But he didn't have much money. In those days, you needed money to get your education. In fact, you do today. That's another story. But in those days you did need a lot of money. So when Walsingham, and this is all true, came up to him and said, listen, I've started something called the Intelligence Service, I'm the spy master, and I'm recruiting spies, he was going to say yes because he needed the money. Spies were well paid. And there's documented proof at Cambridge University that Christopher Marlowe suddenly had lots of money to spend in the refectory on food, and was suddenly able to give big dinner parties and everything. Yeah. This is the man who came from nowhere. And then
tell him the story about when he was denied his degree.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So at the end of it, he did his Bachelor of Arts degree, and then you go on to do a master's. and he was doing his masters, and he had a lot of absenteeism. He would not be at lectures. He would be gone for weeks. And at the end of his degree course, the authorities at Cambridge University said, we cannot give him a degree. We will not give him his certificate because he hasn't attended enough of the lectures. And therefore he can't graduate. And they got the Privy Council, which is the Queen's private council, sent a message to Cambridge University saying, you have to grant Christopher Marlowe his degree because he has been on Her Majesty's service.
Wow.
James Bond of the day.
Yeah,
James Bond. He was James Bond.
This is so interesting. You say that he was one of 9 kids, and the other 8 were girls, were women. So that's another bit of circumstantial evidence. But there's all these great women's roles. Why would there be such great women's roles? Well, if you had 8 sisters, you're probably going to have picked up a few tricks and tips. But again, it's
but also the homosexual connection there. Yeah. I mean, homosexuals have a great relationship with women, in my experience.
One of the documentaries I saw said that Shakespeare was really not very good to his women. He left his daughters and his wife in Stratford for years while he went off gallivanting around London. And
Then why would he write such strong roles? Why would he write roles about liberation and just striving against ignorance for girls, and then not look after your own daughters? It's just
educate your
all right. It's circumstantial again, but
He was also a bit dodgy, tax evading. And
Hey, it's my uncle you're talking about here. Sorry.
No, we have some facts about Shakespeare, and the facts are not very flattering. We happen to know, this is factual, that when he did retire in 1613, 3 years before he died in 1616, he retired to Stratford. He's retired to Stratford.
The Stratfordians.
Yeah, they're coming together. He retired to Stratford-on-Avon. He bought the second biggest house in Stratford-on-Avon, called New Place, and he started a brewery. He hoarded grain. He bought it when it was cheap, and when times were hard, he sold it for twice the price to people who needed it. And he was sued for tax evasion, and he was the snob because he wanted a coat of arms, and he got his father to go with him down to London to pick a coat of arms, and they chose a coat of arms to denote you're a gentleman. You have to pay a lot of money for one, so that was a snobbish thing for him to do. And it was something like, not without right was what he chose in Latin. Not without right is a very interesting motto to put on his coat of arms. Why? Not without right to what? To write the plays? To be the name of the person?
It was a pun as well, not without right.
Not without right to what? The way is to what? It was in French, I think.
Tell the thing about the thing in the church at Stratford. They changed it from a sack of grain to
that's interesting. Has anybody been to the chapel in Stratford-on-Avon and seen the memorial of William Shakespeare? There's a very famous memorial, it's halfway up the wall, and he's holding a quill, and he's looking bald and strange looking, because nobody knows what he looked like. It was perfectly okay for me to have a Jamaican-born person playing Shakespeare, because nobody knew what Shakespeare looked like. Anyway, he's holding a quill, and they discovered that quill was put in his hand many years after he died. When he died, he had a wool sack, and a wool sack denotes a businessman, and they replaced it with a quill.
There's something very interesting as well that Shakespeare wrote, and I can't remember what he wrote for his own eulogy, but it was the rhythm that he wrote it in. So he wrote it in what he called it's simple verse. So if you've got Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. That's in 4. So Mary had a little lamb.
He wrote.
That's what Shakespeare wrote. But iambic pentameter is 5. So shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. It's all 5. It's all 5. And Shakespeare, for his own eulogy, wrote in 4. Which is what
he wasn't well.
Which isn't any of his.
And it's a rubbish rhyme.
It's a terrible rhyme.
Really bad.
It's something about
really
if you dig up my bones, then you're going to be cursed because blah blah blah. I don't know. It's awful. Look at his eulogy that he was supposed to have written.
Yeah.
It's complete rubbish. It was awful.
It's
written like a bad children's book.
And cursed be he who moves my bones. And now they're going to open Shakespeare's grave for the first time in 400 years. They're going to open it. And he's cursed them. Why would he curse anybody to move his prayers?
What's in it? Gold bullion, Nazi gold.
I think they want to open it to find out if there's any manuscripts in there. There certainly weren't any in the will.
That's
so why
another
would
thing.
they be?
I didn't know this until we started doing this, but that a lot of Shakespeare's plays came out after he died. Which is a good trick if you can do it. To keep on writing, not just one or two,
And they
but
weren't stored on
10
a
or
hard drive,
18. I mean, that's a lot of plays that were just, oh, I've just found another one. Oh yes, in his, where were they found? Because he didn't list them in his own property.
And if he didn't write them, then he couldn't have dictated them after his death.
Annoyed with him.
Anyway, so we hope that we've given you something to go home and discuss and think about. And I'd like to encourage you to check out some of these YouTube. I've put a few on the program, YouTube links. You will hopefully become as fascinated as I have become, and have now made these three guys so interested. It is a fascinating thing. I mean, probably the most frustrating thing is we will never know. And the other thing that's a little frustrating is we will never win the argument, because after 400 years there is no way that Stratford-on-Avon is going to lose their tourist industry. There was a lady here the other night at a Q&A I gave, and she wrote the next day, she said, thank you so much for that Q&A and the interesting talk. She said, which is really good, because now I can save money and not go to Stratford-on-Avon when I go to England.
It's pretty as well.
I can look for Shakespeare's Ghost instead. Just think Canterbury would have such a fabulous tourist industry today.
Yeah.
The birthplace of Christopher Marlowe. The sad thing is, of course, it's true, there is no marked grave, there is no place. But in Deptford, we know he was killed in Deptford, that's known. In Deptford, at the church, the St. Nicholas Church in Deptford, there's a plaque on the wall. It says, "Here lies the mortal remains of Christopher Marlowe." And it's got the quote from Dr. Faustus, which is, "Straight be the...
Cut is the branch.
Cut be the...
Yes, here lies the
branch
mortal
that might
That's
have
good, that
grown
is.
full strength.
That might have, cut is the branch that might have grown full strength. Cut is the branch that might have grown full strength. Dr. Faustus quoted, and that's on a plaque.
That's all you got.
In Deptford.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.